Hello everyone and welcome to our channel. So in this video I am going to show you uh, how to overclock your Ryzen 3000 series of CPU to get the best of performance, and also I will focus on what you need to do once you have built your PC and started it for the first time regarding your settings for the BIOS, and also you're setting up your XMP, that is the RAM, proper RAM frequency for optimal performance. So today I'm going to show you with my system that is equipped with an AMD Ryzen 5 3600 CPU and an ASUS B550 Strix F gaming. So first what I will do, apologies for the camera shaking, actually I am using just one hand to hold the phone. So first I'm going to show you what you need to check while you are overclocking or you are setting up. So the very first thing you would like to do is setting up your XMP profile for your RAM. In this case I have been using a Kingston HyperX Fury DDR4 2666 MHz RAM, and it is quite an old one actually. So it is from 2015, and it's like I won't recommend using such an old memory for your Ryzen CPUs, especially the third gen, because these are known to perform great on higher frequency memories. But I will still show you how to if you happen to have one of those, I will show you how to set them up for best performance. So first thing you need to do is, once you have started your system for the first time, even if you don't want to overclock anything, you will need to set up XMP profile for the RAM, or AMP, that is AMD memory profile. XMP stands for extreme memory profile. So what these things are is that the RAMs are programmed to perform the best at a certain frequency, and the fail-safe defaults are first loaded, and you will have to manually configure them through BIOS. So first you need to do is go search for a section called DOCP. Like, this is particular to my ASUS motherboard, and it will vary if you have a different motherboard like from MSI or Gigabyte. So, and you need to search for XMP or DRAM memory profile. So once you have found that, you need to set that for your the specified memory frequency as set by the memory manufacturer. It should come up in the menu. So after that you can just proceed to install Windows, and you will get the optimum stock performance as expected from your hardware. So for overclocking, I will first explain a few components, I will first explain a few parameters and what they do. So this is your BCLK frequency, and it's an acronym for the base clock frequency. What this does is, this is the frequency that is like the base, that sets the base clock for all the components, which includes the CPU and the RAM. Okay, and this is assigned with a multiplier, so that when you multiply that number with this BCLK frequency, you will get the effective clock speed for that individual component. Such as, if you are targeting 3200 megahertz memory clock, and if your base clock is 100, then your memory clock is 32. That is 32 into 100 equal to 3200 megahertz. Similarly, in case of your CPU, this is to be multiplied with the base clock to get the effective frequency. You can see that I have already overclocked my CPU to 4.3 gigahertz, and this is how I did that. So my base clock frequency is 100. Typically for AMD CPUs, you don't need to touch them unless you have a locked CPU, or you are using an A series motherboard that comes with the A320 or A520 series of chipsets. So those chipsets do not support overclocking, and you can only overclock them through the BCLK frequency and not by the multipliers. So this is I am going to show you explain to you first what these do. So this is the BCLK frequency, as I've already mentioned. This is the memory frequency. In ASUS motherboards, these are like directly you can set them to any value you like, provided your memory will be able to support it. So as you can see here, we have some options to set your memory frequency, and it goes all the way up to 6000 megahertz. So you can set it to any value you desire. So extensive testing will be required, which I will explain to you in a later part of this video. And for the CPU, sorry, I forgot to mention that in case of the other motherboards, you might find this as the memory multiplier, which will be in the range of like 2800, 2866, 29.33. Sorry, it's going to be 26.66. It's going to be like 28.00. It's going to be 32.00. It's going to be 31.33, like that. So what you are seeing is that those are the multipliers, and you need to multiply with the BCLK frequency, just like with the CPU core ratio as on the motherboard I have. So just keep that in mind. And for the CPU core ratio, the same thing applies. In ASUS motherboards, these are given as the ratio. That is, if you are targeting, suppose you are targeting a 4500 megahertz CPU clock, then you need to set up the multiplier to 45 in case you have a base clock of 100 megahertz, right? So this is how the calculation is done. Like if you multiply 45 into 100 megahertz, you get 4500 megahertz, which is equivalent to 4.5 gigahertz. So this is the CPU multiplier, and I will also show you some other things that are extremely useful. So this is the CPU core ratio for individual CCX units of your CPU. So you can check this information in other places regarding the AMD Ryzen architecture and how it works, how the cores are handled. So in case of a Ryzen 5 3600, there are 2 CCX units in the CPU, which each of which handles 3 cores or 6 threads, since this is a 6-core 12-thread CPU. So you also get the privilege of individually configuring the CCX0 and CCX1 ratio. Suppose you have a chip that does not overclock well in the CCX1, but it overclocks good in the CCX0. So you can set up the multipliers accordingly, and the CPU will automatically select the best performing core for optimal performance. In my case, I did not find any major difference of overclocking potential. It was a 25 megahertz difference. That is, in some scenarios, I was able to set the 4325 megahertz for the CCX0 and 4300 megahertz for the CCX1. But I realized it does not make much sense to differentiate clocks among 2 CCX in case of such a low frequency as 25 megahertz, and hence I skipped that. But in your case, it can be as high as 100 megahertz even, and you would like to squeeze out the maximum performance from each of your CCX units. So also I would like to show you some other things. So precision boost override, usually these settings should not be touched if you are using a 24/7 overclock, and I believe you will be using that because no one wants to change every overclock parameters every day. So I believe you set it once and for all, and unless you get new hardware, or suppose you get a new cooler, you do not touch that for quite a while. So these things you can just leave it at auto or in your motherboard as well. So another thing I want to mention, and it is very useful, it's the DRAM timing control. So here you will find a lot of values, like you can see the DRAM CAS latency, it's TRC DRD. Okay, these are various timings. I am going to explain you in the easiest way possible. Suppose you have to do suppose your computer have to do 2 consecutive memory operations. Firstly, it will write something to the RAM, and then it is going to read from it. So after writing, the RAM needs some time to process that, or to keep it in the memory blocks and send that address back to the CPU. Okay, so this takes some time to process. That is, suppose you are doing a write operation and there is a consecutive read operation pending, so in between this time there is a small gap, and these are known as timings or latencies. So it's like, I believe it's common sense that you would like these timings to be as low as possible. That will ensure the best performance, because suppose your RAM has written something, and that the lesser the time gap between the consecutive read operation, the faster your memory operations or RAM operations are going to be. So here's the thing. So in some certain situations, you will need to increase latencies, such as if you are targeting on overclocking your RAM. Suppose you have a factory frequency of 3000 megahertz and you are targeting a frequency of 3400 megahertz, you will likely need to increase these values so that the RAM can keep up with the increasing frequency, which will allow for faster read and write speeds, and obviously it is going to need some more time than it would have needed for 2666 megahertz or the stock 3000 megahertz, for example, between two consecutive operations, memory operations. So these things you will have to experiment a bit. Like, I am going to mention what I did with my system in a short while. Firstly, I will mention the most mention worthy parameters for your RAM overclock. This is the CAS latency, and you would like this to be as low as possible without getting unstable. And same goes for the TRCDRD, TRCDWR, DRAM RAS to pre-charge time, and DRAM RAS activation time. So these are the primary timings of your memory. There are other sub timings as well, but usually it's not recommended to touch them unless you are an enthusiast. Details of all these parameters can be found in various websites regarding memory addressing and architecture. Another thing you want to keep an eye on is the command rate, or TRC, sorry. Yes, it's in my motherboard, it is set as, like, it is mentioned as CMD 2T. So here's what it does. So this is the command rate, and this is like the rate at which the RAM is commanded to do certain operations. So this is the same thing as well. This is 1 clock cycle and this is 2 clock cycles. So 1 clock cycle is faster than 2 clock cycles. These are time, as you can see. So this is also another important parameter to consider. CMD 2T, when it is set to 1T, it will obviously perform better, but your RAMs might get unstable, so you need to check that in your system first. So some other things I would like to mention are the FCLK frequency. This is explicitly for AMD CPUs, and this is actually the controller. This is actually the memory controller. So you see, these AMD Ryzen CPUs, these are ASUS, that is system on chip. So these basically controls a lot of stuff. That is, your memory controller is integrated within the CPU, your PCI Express controller is integrated within the CPU, and in Ryzen CPUs, even the M.2 slots, that are the NVMe slots. One of the slots at the present generation is controlled by the CPU. So all these are integrated within the processor itself. So your processor basically has the CPU, the memory controller, the PCI Express controller, the NVMe controller. Everything resides on the processor as a whole. So this FCLK frequency does is, this basically controls the frequency of the memory controller, and for ideal scenario, this should be equal to your memory controller, your memory frequency. That is, if you are targeting a memory frequency of 3200 megahertz, the FCLK frequency should also be 3200 megahertz. So this is another parameter I thought which was important. And you can also, sorry, I mentioned there this should be half of the RAM frequency. This is the FCLK frequency. I was confused. So this FCLK frequency should be half of your RAM frequency. So as you can see, we had the maximum memory frequency, if you remember, as 6000 megahertz. I am going to show you again. And the FCLK frequency, the maximum you see is 3000 megahertz, I believe. Yes, it is 3000 megahertz. So for ideal situation, this FCLK frequency always needs to be set at half of the RAM frequency. So these are all the basic parameters. Some other things to consider while overclocking is that, let me focus my camera again. Yeah, so some other things to mention that if you are considering to overclock your CPU, you might want to disable core performance boost. So you are going to get that setting under AMD PBS. No, that's not the one. Yes, AMD CBS contains all these settings, and here you can see the core performance boost, which I have already disabled since I have manually overclocked the CPU. So say for a Ryzen 5 3600, the maximum peak short burst clock is 4200 megahertz or 4.2 gigahertz. Chances are that you will be able to achieve a much better sustained overclock frequency when you are overclocking manually, and hence core performance keeping core performance boost enabled in that case does not make much sense. So this is another thing to consider as well. So now I am going to show you what I did for my overclocking for keeping a 24/7 overclock for my system, and I'm proud to tell you that this has increased a lot of performance, especially in multi-threaded benchmarks like Cinebench and even gaming performance as well. So video renderings, that is CPU intensive tasks, are going to get a lot of benefit from overclocking your CPU. Memory intensive tasks like video rendering and then gaming, so and also other types of rendering tasks, if you get that, all basic workstation kinds of tasks, all are going to benefit from a good memory frequency as well. So here's what I did, and I'm also going to show you what you need to keep an eye on while you are adjusting the voltages. So here's what I did. As you know, in case of the Ryzen 5 3600, we have a base clock of 3.6 gigahertz and a max turbo clock of 4.2 gigahertz, which depends on the temperatures actually and certain load conditions. So what I did was I targeted as much high frequency as possible. You see, with the core performance boost that AMD offers, which is the turbo clock basically, it does not allow a sustained clock of 4.2 gigahertz. You will see it varying to 3975 megahertz or 4 gigahertz, that is 4000 megahertz, something like that. But like, it won't push it to the maximum clock when not required, but sometimes, you know, it will give you an edge in performance, especially in single threaded tasks, so which includes gaming as well, by the way. So here's what I did. I set my CPU core clock ratio at 43, which means I will be able to achieve a 4.3 gigahertz clock on my CPU. And for that, I set a voltage of I increased the voltage by 625 millivolts. Not 625, it's it's 0.0625 volts, and this will also vary according to your motherboard. So you will get the option for millivolts. So just convert and select the voltage accordingly. So here there is a limitation for 24/7 usage, and AMD recommends for the 3rd gen Ryzen CPUs you should not go above 1.4 volts for your CPU voltage for 24/7 operation. Yes, if you are doing some overclocking adventures on a cold day with some, say, liquid nitrogen lying around or some dry ice lying around, you can probably go some way higher to achieve those world records as they do. But for 24/7 clocks, AMD does not recommend keeping a voltage above 1.4. So 1.4 is the max you would like to set for your CPU for a 24/7 overclock. So here I am going to show you. So 1.1 volt is the standard stock voltage for a Ryzen 5 3600 in standard operation without turboing, that is without going into turbo boost mode or core performance boost mode. So what I did, I increased the I kept a positive sign on the voltage offset and increased it by 0.0625 volts, so which essentially brings the voltage to around 1.15 volts. So it's around a 50 millivolt increase, you can say. So this I will tell you how I managed to come up to this exact value in just a while. So as for the RAM, so your up to 3600 megahertz, your motherboard should be able to set the FCLK frequency accordingly. That is 3600 megahertz is the maximum non-overclocked frequency the Ryzen 5 third generation can support. But in case you have better RAMs, or if you have better silicon in your RAMs and you know they are no good overclockers, so you might need to then manually set the FCLK frequency if you are planning on going above 3600 megahertz for your RAM. So here's what I did with the RAM, and you probably might be wondering that why I am using such old DDR4 RAM. So as you might not know, I got this RAM kit as a prize from an overclocking competition. It's a 32 GB kit from Kingston and rated at 2666 megahertz. So and these are quite good Strix even to today's standards. I will just mention that in a while, explain that in a while. So here's what I believe the reason to be. So these are rated at 2666 megahertz, and these are kit from 2015, I must say. So since Ryzen CPUs, especially the third gen, are known to perform better with higher frequency RAMs, I managed to overclock up to 3200 megahertz all the way from 2666 megahertz, and you can see the timings are 15, 17, 17, 35, but I have managed to keep a very decent timing actually for even new DDRs, for some even new DDR4 RAM kits. I managed to keep a timing of 16, 16, 16, 36 clock timings, 35 clock timings for my RAM, even at a higher frequency. So the only thing I had to essentially increase was the first value, that is DRAM CIS latency. So these RAMs are Kingston HyperX Fury and are having SK Hynix chips, which are known for their good overclocking potential, and these perform well enough. So if you have got newer RAMs, your chances of them overclocking might be even better. But as for me, I am quite happy with the frequency I have achieved and the performance it offers. So as for the RAM voltage, you would not like to go above 1.45 volts for 24/7 use. So this is the maximum recommended voltage across various forums for not having an active cooler on top of your RAMs, which I don't have. It's just cooled by the standard fans on my case. I am using a Corsair 100R chassis, which is a very standard chassis actually, nothing fancy, but it gets the job done. So yes, so these overclock settings are going to improve a lot of your performance, I believe, and I am just going to show you with some of the benchmarks I have done previously, and also I'm going to show you right now. So first, before the benchmarks, I will just tell you how to ensure stability of your system. So once you have so here's what you need to do. So go check some forums. So if you have a Ryzen 5 3600, check the forums for an average known good overclock at a particular voltage, and keep those in mind. So just target that fixed frequency with that voltage and save those settings. So you need to be careful, like not going above 1.4 volt, of course, for 24/7 use. Consult multiple forums, consult various YouTube videos as well for other users using the same CPUs and their known good overclock potential. So And for testing, here I am going to show you how to do the testing. So suppose you have make a note of some of the settings that you need to. Suppose you can take a reference of the one I am using. Say for example, you can target a frequency of 4.3 gigahertz at 62.5 millivolt voltage increase. So do that and check for stability, and I am going to show you how to ensure stability for the same. Yeah, so I'm going to show you. So there is a very small tool available for free for stress testing your CPU clocks, and that is called Prime 95. You might have heard of it. And for your temperature monitoring, you would like to keep an eye out on your temperatures. So you will need to download a very small software called HW Info 64. This is the better one. HW Monitor is also good, but HW Info 64 is just better. It shows a lot of temperature values for different sections, including RAM temperatures, which is quite rare, honestly speaking. So I will need to update it later on. So as I am going to show you, if you need to launch the software and click on the sensors button, and here you are going to see a lot of the temperature and clock related values, even the VID voltages. These are voltage identification, these are not actual voltages. This is what the CPU asks, that is the stock frequency. And just scroll down and you will find voltages and power for everything. So here see, you can get CPU temperatures, then the CPU die temperature, then the CPU CCD1 temperatures. The Ryzen 5 has only one CCD, so you get only one temperature value. And for Prime 95, here is what you are going to do. So keep HW Info 64 open on one side and launch Prime 95. So here you will need to select smallest small FFTs, tests L1, L2, L3 caches, maximum power, heat and CPU stress. So as you can see, like probably decode from this sentence as well. So this is the highest amount of stress test you can possibly keep with do with the software. So just run it and see how well it goes for both the temperatures as well as the stability. So for the temperatures, you are going to get the values here. I have somewhat been aggressive in my overclocking, but my temperatures do not usually go above 90 degrees Celsius, and the Ryzen 5 3600 has a max safe limit of 95 degrees Celsius. So you can say I am running on the edge, but that's what I like to do because I don't use my computer 24/7, and obviously the CPU is unlikely to be stressed this much when I am playing games or doing something CPU intensive, because I do not use my system for such high-end stuff, honestly speaking. So here's what you need to check on your CPU. So I have deliberately what should I say, I have deliberately kept an unstable overclock, and here you can see this is how you can check the CPU stability. So what it does, this operation calculates prime numbers in an infinite loop, so it goes on and on and on until infinite, and needless to say this involves a lot of CPU work. So in here you will get 12 windows like this, or the number of windows equal to the number of threads your processor have. So since I am using a Ryzen 5 3600, I have got 12 threads, and hence you have got 12 windows. You will get 12 windows here. So and if the cores are, or if the threads are stable, or if the cores are stable, your tests are going to pass. Okay, and you will see that it will pass a certain number of cycles, but this is something you need to avoid. That is, when you see that there is an error, your overclock is most likely not stable. So I am going to show you how to mitigate this problem as well. So I'm going to stop this test. And yeah, some of you might be wondering how long you need to run this test. Well, I will say for daily usage, and if you are a gamer and edit videos also, around 25 to 30 minutes of stress testing with this application is fine, honestly speaking. And that's all. That's like, there's nothing much about this. So as for your RAM, there is another software. I will just check the temperatures, and yeah, you can see it has just touched a little above 90. So yeah, it's quite hot today as well. So, and I'm not running my air conditioner at the moment. So this is how you can stress stability. And so I'm going to stop this test and show you how to test stability of your RAM. So there's another software available which is called memtest64. So just let me show you. This is the software I'm talking about. So this is a very simple software. Sorry, you need to run it as administrator. Sorry for my camera has went out of focus. Yes. You need to run it as administrator. You can download it. You just search a basic. You can just do a basic Google search and you can get this software downloaded. So yes. So what you need to do is like, suppose you have 16 gigs of RAM. So you can check with around 10 GB of memory with like till you hit instability, and you can test for like 5 loops. 5 loops is fine, and click on begin test. So first it will allocate the required amount of memory to perform this operation, and here you can get an error like it might fail to allocate the available amount of memory with the set amount of memory, the value that you have given. In that case, just restart your system once and you will be good to go usually. Or you can also put the system in sleep mode for a few seconds and wake it up and you will be fine. So here it will perform some tests for the RAM regarding data reading error, data writing error, then bit pattern test, moving data from RAM to some other block of memory on another RAM stick, suppose, things like that. So this is how you can test stability. It will run for a while and you can specify the number of loops. So that's it. So here's how you are going to set the voltages. So once you have okay, I'm going to restart and go to BIOS and show it to you again. Yeah, so if you're prime 95, I'm going to mention 2 scenarios here because this is quite useful and important. So suppose you are happy with 4.3 gigahertz and you don't want to go higher anymore. So what you can do is if this is scenario 1, that is if your prime 95 test has been stable for around 30 minutes. So you might wonder that maybe my chip is good and I have set the voltage to more than what it would ideally require. So just go to your voltage setting again. So suppose you are happy with 4300 and that is 4.3 gigahertz, and just go to your CPU voltage area and decrease it by a tiny notch, say suppose say 50 millivolts, and then save these settings and boot back into Windows and try a test with prime 95. If it still passes, then you have headroom to decrease it even further. It's like you don't want to increase your voltage unnecessarily for an overclock that you want. Like suppose your CPU is capable of even more, but you don't need that. You are happy with the performance, so you can just save it from being heated up more or to save power as well, and hence you will have some headroom for decreasing. So just keep on decreasing by tiny notches until you are unstable, and then go up two steps higher than the one you failed with. So suppose you have failed with 3750, like this 37.5 millivolts of voltage increase. Suppose your overclock settings have failed with that, but you have passed with 43.75 millivolts. Just keep it a bit tad higher, so that you have some headroom for any situations that might cause it to get unstable. Like suppose you are playing a multiplayer game and for some reason your CPU is not stable and it crashes the game, so you are not going to be happy about that. So this is another thing. The second scenario is there are actually three scenarios. The second scenario is if you want higher frequencies. So suppose your CPU is stable at 62.5 millivolts at 4300 megahertz, and it is very well stable. It has passed the prime 95 30 minutes of test. It has passed the memtest 64 test, although it is related to the RAM, and you just want to go up higher and see and squeeze out the maximum performance you're going to get from your chip. So just increase the multiplier by one notches. In case of Ryzen CPUs, you have 0.25 as the increment value, so it will increase by 0.25 every time you increase it. So just keep on increasing by 25 megahertz until it gets unstable, and then you can bring it down a bit till you are stable again. So this is basically the basic principle of overclocking. And the third case and the final case is that if your system the final and last case is that if your system is not stable with the settings. So what you need to do is, if you are hitting temperatures very high, such as if you are crossing suppose 90 degrees Celsius, so you do not have much headroom for voltage increase anymore, and hence you will have to drop multiplier by a bit to reduce clock frequencies. So suppose you're unstable with 4300 megahertz at a certain voltage, and you are on the edge. You have crossed 94 degrees Celsius support, and the Ryzen CPU starts to throttle from around 95 degrees Celsius. Throttling means that the CPU will protect itself from thermal damage by decreasing frequency and voltages. So you of course don't want that, because that's inconsistent performance and it will harm the chip in the long run. So what you can do is just decrease the voltage and also the multiplier at the same time, and just test for stability. So suppose you are hitting on the edge of thermal throttling at this voltage, so you might want to drop it a bit, like say 43.75 millivolts, and also drop your multiplier by or you were at 43 and you would like to set it say 4250, that is 4.25 gigahertz, which is also quite good. So this depends on a lot of factors, like the silicon quality of your chip, which is the silicon lottery, as you might know. Just like human beings, no two pieces of silicon are made the same. There's a silicon lottery that takes place. So many factors are there. The cooler you are using, which will help with temperatures. I will absolutely not recommend overclocking your system on the stock cooler, especially the one that the 3600 comes with, because let me be honest, it's not good. It's just a chunk of aluminum and a silent fan. That's all there is. So for the 3700X, however, that is the Ryzen 7 3700X, however, the stock cooler is quite good, and you can squeeze out some extra performance with some overclocking. So but I would highly recommend an aftermarket cooler for this, preferably a liquid cooler or an AIO. So now I believe I have explained overclocking as much as possible. So I will just focus on the benchmarks now and let you know what I feel about keeping a 24/7 overclock like this. So I fired another very famous benchmarking and overall system information utility, and that's called AIDA64. So I am using a licensed version of the AIDA64 Engineer Edition, and here you can see I have done a benchmark of the CPU Queen at my overclock settings, and its performance is quite good. So you can see it is performing better than the i7-8700K, which is like quite a more expensive CPU, honestly speaking, than the 3600. So under normal situations, this the Ryzen 5 3600 sits around the i7-8700K in this particular benchmark, but here we have managed to squeeze out around 6000 points higher than the 8700K, and we are almost touching the Ryzen 7 1800X. We are sitting in between the 8-core Ryzen 7 CPU and an i7 CPU. So as for CPU photoworks, this is a memory intensive benchmark actually, and you will see we are actually competing with quad channel systems only. That is, this is probably the highest dual score for any system with a dual channel memory. So everything above, as you can see, are all achieved with quad channel or even octal channel memory. These are server grade systems or servers. So these are like very nice benchmarks, and you can understand the difference in performance you are going to get. So and now I am going to show you about Cinebench that I have achieved. I'm going to show out Cinebench at 20 scores. So here you can see my present score. I just ran it like around 10 minutes back probably, and my score is 3915, and the normal score for a stock Ryzen 5 3600 is around 3600 points only. So it's around 3600 to 3650. So that's the average points you get with the Cinebench at 20. But see, we have managed to squeeze out even some more points for multi-threaded benchmarks. You will be able to see that for yourself once you have overclocked your chip. And for my single core score, I am just going to show you another great benchmark. That is, there is a inbuilt benchmark within CPU Z itself. So let me show you that. So one second, there are some personal stuff here. So here you can see my overclock settings. Present voltage, as I said, it sits around a 50 millivolt increase. And go to bench and select select bench CPU. This is the multi-thread score, and now it is performing the single thread score. I will just get the performance metrics to you in a minute. Yeah, it has completed. So let me show you how well it fares. So you can compare it with various CPUs on stock frequencies from this list. Say we are trying to compare it with say the 8700K. Take the 8700K because this is also a 6-core CPU and a fair competition. So you can see in multi-thread benchmarks we are very well above the 8700K, and with the single thread, as you all know, Intel have an edge in single thread performance. The reason why many games run better on Intel platforms than AMD, but you can see we have managed to catch up with them, and the difference is, honestly speaking, not much in the single thread as well. So let us take, for example, if let us check if the 3600 is here, so that will be a great comparison, I think. So just wait for a while, I will check. I don't think this 3600 is there. I have not seen it, otherwise I would have done that myself. So no, the 3700X is there though. Yeah, so this is another great example. So needless to say, it is obviously going to score much higher on multi-thread because it has 8 cores, that is 2 more cores, and 16 threads, that is 4 more threads than our Ryzen 5 3600. And needless to say, its multi-thread score is much higher than our 3600 even after overclocking, but you can see we are still having an edge on the single thread score, and that is nothing but because of the higher clock speeds that we achieved after overclocking. So yeah, so let us check if any other competing CPU is available for a fair competition. Let's say we take the last generation Ryzen 7 2700X for example, and see there is we have almost like caught up with a 8-core processor from just a generation back, and we are leading in single thread benchmark as well. So let's check if any other competing CPU is there. I don't think so. It's worth it to check any more just in case. Ryzen 5 1600 is there, but let us check. For example, yeah, it's a hell and heaven difference in performance with that, but you can check reference with a 3600 from the internet, and I am very much sure these scores are much higher than what you will find on the internet for a stock Ryzen 5 3600. So I believe I have explained enough for overclocking and the performance benefits it is going to give you. Feel free to ask any questions you might have in the comments on the video, and I will try my best to answer them as much as possible as to my knowledge. And see you, take care.